My cousin bragged about stealing my inheritance, so I made sure he inherited something else entirely. Raven had always been Dad's favorite. When our grandmother passed 3 years ago, she left her antique jewelry collection to both of us equally, worth about $180,000 according to the appraisal. But somehow, when the estate was settled, Raven walked away with everything. The lawyer claimed there was a clerical error in the paperwork. Grandma always loved me more anyway. She smirked at the family barbecue, dripping in diamonds that should have been half mine. She knew I'd appreciate beautiful things. I watched her parade around in our grandmother's sapphire necklace, the one Grandma had promised would be mine since I was 12. Every piece told a story. The pearl earrings from her honeymoon, the ruby brooch from her mother. Now they decorated someone who saw them as trophies instead of memories. That night, I started planning. Raven had a secret she'd kill to keep hidden. 3 years ago, she'd been driving drunk when she hit a motorcyclist. The rider survived, barely, but Raven fled the scene. Dad's connections made the whole thing disappear. Witnesses suddenly couldn't remember license plates. Security footage mysteriously corrupted. The victim's family pressured to accept a settlement and stay quiet. But I had proof. The night of the accident, I'd been following her from the bar, worried about her drinking. I watched the whole thing through my windshield, filmed it on my phone. The video showed her getting out, seeing the bleeding man, then speeding away. For 3 years, I'd kept that video as insurance. Now it was time to collect. I waited until Raven's engagement party. She was marrying Colt, a prominent surgeon whose hospital board included several city council members, the kind of man who couldn't afford a scandal. During her toast about new beginnings and leaving the past behind, I stood up. "Speaking of the past," I said, pulling out my phone, "I have something everyone should see." The room went quiet. Raven's face drained of color. "This is from 3 years ago, the night Thomas Hendricks was hit by a drunk driver on Maple Street." I pressed play. The footage was crystal clear. Raven's car, her license plate, her face in the headlights as she checked the damage before fleeing. Colt stepped back from her like she was toxic. His mother gasped. Dad lunged toward me, but it was too late. The video was already uploading to social media, tagged with every relevant news outlet. "You destroyed that family," I said calmly. "Thomas still can't walk properly. His kids lost their house paying medical bills. And you've been wearing our grandmother's jewelry like you deserve beautiful things." Raven was sobbing. "Please, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly. Grandma left us equal shares because she believed in justice. So here's yours." Within an hour, the police were at the door. The Hendricks family's lawyer was already filing to reopen the case. Colt's family released a statement canceling the wedding. But that wasn't the inheritance I was really giving her. This morning, I got a call from someone claiming to represent Thomas Hendricks' older brother. Apparently, he'd just gotten out of prison after serving time for assault. "He's been looking for the person who destroyed his family," the voice said. "Thanks for the video. Made him real easy to find." I hung up the phone and sat in my empty apartment, staring at the wall where Grandma's jewelry should have been displayed. The silence felt different now. Not peaceful, but hollow. Like the moment after you throw a stone into still water and wait for the ripples to reach the shore. What had I done? For 3 years, I'd carried that video like a loaded weapon, telling myself it was about justice. But sitting there in the aftermath, I realized I'd been lying to myself. This wasn't about Thomas Hendricks or his family. This wasn't even about the jewelry, not really. This was about watching Dad choose Raven over me, again and again, until I couldn't breathe from the weight of being invisible. My phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? Is this Quinn Castellanos?" The voice was rough, tired. "Who's asking?" "This is Detective Ray Morrison, Metro Police. I need to ask you some questions about the video you posted online last night." I'd been expecting this call. "I'm available whenever you need me." "How about now? Can you come down to the station?" An hour later, I sat across from Detective Morrison in a sterile interview room that smelled like burnt coffee and industrial disinfectant. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with the kind of face that had seen too much. "So you've been holding on to this evidence for 3 years," he said, reviewing my statement. "Can you explain why you didn't come forward sooner?" I'd practiced this answer. "I was afraid. My uncle has connections throughout the city. I didn't think anyone would believe me, or that anything would come of it." It wasn't entirely a lie. Dad's brother did own half the commercial real estate downtown, and his golf buddies included judges and city council members. But the real reason I'd stayed silent was more complicated. 3 years ago, I'd been a different person. Fresh out of college, still believing family meant something. I'd watched Raven climb out of her BMW, her designer heels clicking on the asphalt as she knelt beside Thomas Hendricks. For a moment, I thought she might actually help him. Instead, she checked her bumper for damage, glanced around to see if anyone was watching, then got back in her car and drove away. I'd sat in my own car, recording it all, too shocked to move. By the time I processed what I'd witnessed, she was gone, and sirens were approaching. I'd driven home in a daze, the video burning in my phone like a guilty secret. The victim's family settled out of court. Detective Morrison continued. They were told the driver was never identified, because Dad made sure of that. "Your father, Vincent Castellanos, he fixed it, made the witnesses forget what they saw, had the security footage disappear, told Thomas's family they were lucky to get any settlement at all." Morrison leaned back in his chair. "That's a serious accusation." "It's the truth. You can investigate if you want, but you'll hit a wall of lawyers and convenient memory loss." He studied me for a long moment. "What changed your mind about coming forward?" This was the question I'd been dreading. How could I explain that seeing Raven wear Grandma's sapphire necklace at the engagement party had snapped something inside me? That watching her toast to new beginnings while Thomas Hendricks still couldn't walk without a cane had made me feel like I was choking on years of swallowed injustice? I realized that staying silent made me complicit. I said instead. Morrison nodded. "We'll need you to testify when this goes to trial." I understand. After the interview, I drove to the hospital where Thomas Hendricks worked, or used to work, before the accident. The receptionist told me he was in physical therapy and directed me to the rehabilitation wing. I found him on a recumbent bike, pedaling slowly while a therapist adjusted the resistance. He was thinner than I remembered from the news coverage, his left leg clearly weaker than his right. When he finished, I approached carefully. Mr. Hendricks? My name is Quinn Castellanos. I was hoping we could talk. He looked up, recognition dawning in his eyes. You're the one who posted the video. Yes. He studied my face for a long moment. Why now? I sat down in the chair beside his bike. Because it was the right thing to do, and because I'm sorry it took me so long to find the courage. Thomas wiped sweat from his forehead with a towel. 3 years. You know what 3 years cost me? I can't imagine. My kids had to switch schools because we lost the house. My wife took a second job to pay the medical bills. I went from running marathons to celebrating when I can walk to the mailbox without falling down. His voice was steady, but I could see the pain underneath. Every morning I wake up and remember that someone hit me and drove away, and I wondered if I'd ever know who. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. Are you? Or are you just sorry you got caught up in family drama? The question hit like a physical blow. What do you mean? I've been reading about your family online since the video went viral. Your cousin? Your father? The inheritance dispute. This looks less like justice, and more like revenge. I opened my mouth to deny it, then closed it. Because he was right, wasn't he? If Raven had split the jewelry fairly, would I have ever come forward? Maybe it started as revenge, I admitted. But that doesn't make the video less real, or what she did to you less wrong. Thomas nodded slowly. No, it doesn't. But it makes your motives less pure than you'd like to believe. We sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment. Around us, other patients worked with therapists, rebuilding strength and mobility stolen by accidents and illness. The sound of their determination felt like a rebuke. The lawyer called yesterday, Thomas said finally. They're reopening the case. Good. My older brother called too. Says he wants to handle this personally. Thomas looked at me directly. Dexter's not a subtle man. Spent 8 years in prison for putting someone in the ICU during a bar fight. He's been clean for 2 years, but seeing that video brought back a lot of anger. My stomach dropped. What are you saying? I'm saying you might have started something you can't control. And while I understand wanting justice, I don't want more violence in my name. I left the hospital feeling like I'd swallowed broken glass. What had started as calculated revenge was spiraling beyond my control, involving people I'd never considered and consequences I hadn't foreseen. At home, I found Dad waiting in my living room. He had a spare key from when I'd been in the hospital last year, and apparently saw no problem using it without permission. We need to talk, he said without preamble. How did you get in here? That's not important. What's important is fixing the mess you've created. I set my purse on the kitchen counter, putting distance between us. I didn't create anything. I just revealed the truth. The truth? Dad's voice was sharp. The truth is that you've destroyed our family over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Raven stole my inheritance and covered up a hit and run. Which part is the misunderstanding? Dad moved closer, and I caught the scent of his expensive cologne mixed with something sharper. Stress sweat. The jewelry situation was complicated. There were debts you didn't know about. Estate taxes that had to be paid. That's not what the lawyer said 3 years ago. Lawyers say what they're paid to say. Raven handled the estate settlement while you were grieving. She made hard decisions to preserve what she could. The lie was so smooth, so rehearsed, that for a moment I almost believed him. This was Dad's superpower, making you question your own memory, your own perception of events. Even if that were true, it doesn't explain the hit and run. Dad sank into my couch without being invited, suddenly looking older than his 62 years. That was an accident. She was scared, confused. She came to me immediately and I helped her handle it properly. Thomas Hendricks lost everything. The family was compensated generously, with hush money, with a settlement that gave them more than they would have received in court. Everyone won. I stared at my father, this man who had taught me to ride a bike and helped me with algebra homework, who had also spent 3 years lying to my face about destroying an innocent family. Everyone didn't win, Dad. Thomas still can't walk properly. His kids lost their home. Raven never faced consequences for what she did. And now she's facing consequences that could destroy her life. Is that what you wanted? The honest answer was yes. And that realization made me feel sick. I wanted justice. You wanted revenge. There's a difference, Quinn. And the fact that you can't see it worries me. Dad's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his face went pale. What is it? Raven's at the hospital. Someone attacked her outside her apartment. The emergency room was chaos. Police officers, family members, reporters who'd caught wind of the story. I found Mom in the waiting area, crying into tissues while my aunt rubbed her back. How bad is it? I asked. Mom looked up with red, swollen eyes. Broken ribs, concussion, bruises everywhere. They said if a neighbor hadn't called the police. She didn't finish the sentence, but I understood. I also understood that this was my fault. Did they catch who did it? Not yet. But there were witnesses. Someone saw a man matching Dexter Hendricks' description leaving the scene. I sank into a plastic chair, the weight of consequences crushing down on me. This wasn't supposed to happen. Exposing Raven was supposed to feel like justice, like balancing the scales. Instead, it felt like I'd thrown a match into a powder keg. The police want to talk to you, Mom said. They know about your video, about the family history. They think this might be connected. Before I could respond, Detective Morrison appeared at my side. Ms. Castellanos, we need to speak. This time, the interview room felt smaller, the questions sharper. Tell me about your relationship with Dexter Hendricks, Morrison began. I don't have one. I've never met him. But you knew he existed. You knew about his criminal history. I thought about my conversation with Thomas at the hospital. I learned about him today. From who? His brother mentioned him. Morrison leaned forward. What exactly did Thomas Hendricks tell you about Dexter? I recounted the conversation as accurately as I could remember. Morrison took notes, his expression unreadable. Did you encourage this contact in any way? Encourage what contact? Between Dexter Hendricks and your cousin? No, I had no idea he would. I mean, I never intended for anyone to get hurt. Morrison studied me for a long moment. Ms. Castellanos, when you posted that video, what did you think would happen? The question hung in the air like smoke. What had I thought would happen? That Raven would face legal consequences, lose her engagement, suffer social embarrassment, that people would finally see her as I did, selfish, entitled, destructive. But I hadn't thought about Thomas's brother, about the ripple effects beyond my own family drama. I thought she would face justice through proper channels. I said finally. Justice. That word keeps coming up. Morrison closed his notebook. Here's the thing about justice, Ms. Castellanos. It's supposed to be blind, impartial, measured. What you did was none of those things. He was right, and we both knew it. Your cousin is in critical condition. If she dies, this becomes a homicide investigation. And while you didn't swing the bat or throw the punches, you lit the fuse that led to this explosion. I spent the next 3 days in a haze of guilt and anxiety, checking news updates and hospital reports obsessively. Raven was stable but sedentary, heavily medicated for pain and trauma. Dad had hired private security for her room, which told me everything about how seriously he was taking the threat. Dexter Hendricks was arrested on the second day. The evidence was overwhelming. Security footage from multiple cameras, DNA under Raven's fingernails, witnesses who saw him fleeing the scene. He'd beaten her with a crowbar in the parking garage of her apartment building, methodically and deliberately. When I saw his mugshot on the news, I was surprised by how ordinary he looked. Average height, thinning hair, the kind of face you'd forget in a crowd. Not a monster, just a man who'd let anger consume him until violence seemed like the only answer. Thomas Hendricks held a press conference 3 days after his brother's arrest. Standing beside his lawyer outside the courthouse, he looked exhausted and older than his 43 years. My family has been through enough trauma, he said, reading from a prepared statement. While we appreciate that new evidence has come to light regarding the hit-and-run incident that changed our lives, we do not support vigilante justice. We believe in the legal system and we trust that both cases, the original hit-and-run and this assault, will be handled appropriately by law enforcement. A reporter called out, "What's your message to Quinn Castellanos, who posted the video?" Thomas looked directly into the camera. I understand the impulse for revenge. When someone hurts you or your family, it's natural to want to hurt them back. But revenge creates more victims, not fewer. It doesn't heal wounds, it opens new ones. His words felt like a personal indictment, and they should have, because he was describing exactly what I'd done, even if I'd been too self-righteous to see it at the time. That afternoon, I drove to the cemetery where Grandma was buried. Her grave was in the old section, beneath a massive oak tree that had been there longer than the city itself. The headstone was simple granite with her name, dates, and a single line, "Beloved Mother and Grandmother." I'd brought her favorite flowers, white roses, and arranged them carefully beside the stone. Then I sat in the grass and tried to remember her as she really was, not as the symbol of injustice I'd made her into. Grandma had been kind but not naive, generous but not foolish. She'd worked as a teacher for 40 years, saving every penny to buy the jewelry collection that had caused so much trouble. But more than the jewelry, I remembered her stories about each piece, where it came from, why it mattered, the love and hope it represented. I messed up, Grandma, I whispered to the headstone. I let my anger turn me into someone you wouldn't recognize. The wind rustled the oak leaves, and for a moment I could almost hear her voice. Then you know what you need to do, honey. I did know. I'd known for days, but been too proud to admit it. The next morning, I drove to Thomas Hendricks' house. It was a modest ranch in a middle-class neighborhood, with a well-maintained yard and children's toys scattered on the front porch. When Thomas answered the door, he looked unsurprised to see me. "I've been expecting you," he said. "Can we talk?" He stepped aside to let me enter. The house was small but warm, with family photos covering every available surface. I saw Thomas in his marathon days, running with a wide smile and strong stride. I saw him with his wife and 2 young children, everyone laughing at some private joke. "Coffee?" he offered. "Please." We sat at his kitchen table, and I tried to find words for what I needed to say. "I'm sorry," I began, "for everything, for waiting 3 years to come forward, for my motives being mixed up with family drama, for what happened to your brother and my cousin. I set things in motion that I couldn't control, and people got hurt because of my choices." Thomas sipped his coffee, considering. "Dexter made his own choices. I can't absolve you of everything, but I also can't blame you for his actions. Your press conference was right, about revenge creating more victims. My wife helped me write that speech. She's better with words than I am." He gestured toward a framed photo of a woman with kind eyes and graying hair. "She said something else that might interest you." "What's that?" "She said people usually seek revenge when they feel powerless. That anger is often grief in disguise." Thomas looked at me directly. "What were you grieving, Quinn?" The question caught me off guard, and I felt tears I'd been holding back for days finally spill over. My relationship with my family, the person I thought my father was, the grandmother I'd idealized, and the inheritance I'd turned into a symbol of love. I wiped my eyes with my sleeve. I was angry about the jewelry, but I was really grieving the realization that my family wasn't who I thought they were. Thomas nodded. "Grief makes us do stupid things sometimes." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, 2 people who'd been caught up in consequences neither of us had fully anticipated. "What happens now?" I asked. "Dexter will probably get 10 to 15 years. The DA is charging him with aggravated assault and assault with a deadly weapon. Your cousin will recover, physically at least. And the hit-and-run case? That's moving forward too. The district attorney says your video, combined with the original physical evidence, gives them a strong case. Thomas paused. For what it's worth, I'm glad the truth finally came out. I just wish it hadn't taken so long, and I wish it hadn't led to more violence. I understood. Justice delayed often becomes justice corrupted, twisted by anger and frustration until it resembles revenge more than resolution. Is there anything I can do to help with your medical bills or? Thomas held up a hand. My family doesn't want your money, Quinn. What we want is for you to learn from this. To understand that justice isn't something you get to dispense according to your personal timeline or your family drama. I'm trying to understand that. Good. Because there's something else you should know. Thomas refilled his coffee cup. Your cousin's lawyer has been in touch with mine. They want to discuss a civil settlement. For the hit and run? Yes. Apparently, facing criminal charges has given her some perspective on accountability. This was unexpected. What kind of settlement? Full compensation for my medical expenses, lost wages and ongoing care, plus damages for pain and suffering. It's more than the original hush money settlement your father arranged. I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Relief that Thomas would finally get proper compensation, but also recognition that this was happening only because I'd forced Raven's hand through public exposure. That's good news, right? It's necessary, but it doesn't erase 3 years of hardship for my family. Thomas studied my face. I think you understand that now. I did. Some things couldn't be undone, only acknowledged and learned from. Over the following weeks, I watched both legal cases unfold from the sidelines. Dexter Hendricks pleaded guilty to aggravated assault and was sentenced to 12 years in prison. In a brief statement to the court, he expressed remorse for his actions and apologized to both families for the additional pain he'd caused. Raven's case was more complicated. The 3-year delay had created challenges for the prosecution. Witnesses had scattered, physical evidence had degraded, and statute of limitations issues complicated some charges. But the video evidence was compelling, and Raven's legal team advised her to negotiate a plea deal. She ultimately pleaded guilty to hit and run causing injury and leaving the scene of an accident. The judge sentenced her to 2 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months. Additionally, she was ordered to pay full restitution to the Hendricks family and perform 500 hours of community service upon release. At the sentencing hearing, I sat in the back row and watched Raven stand before the judge. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished by months of legal proceedings and public scrutiny. When asked if she had anything to say, she turned toward the Hendricks family. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely audible. "I was young and scared and I made terrible choices. I've spent 3 years trying to forget what I did, but I realize now that forgetting isn't the same as making amends. I can't undo the harm I caused, but I accept responsibility for it." It wasn't eloquent, but it sounded genuine. After 3 years of denying and hiding, she was finally acknowledging the truth. Thomas Hendricks nodded when she finished speaking. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was acknowledgement, a recognition that accountability had finally arrived, even if it was long overdue. After the hearing, Dad approached me in the courthouse hallway. We hadn't spoken since the day Raven was attacked, and the silence between us had grown toxic with unresolved anger and disappointment. "Are you satisfied?" he asked. It was a loaded question, and we both knew it. Was I satisfied with Raven's punishment? With the destruction of her engagement and reputation? With the way everything had spiraled beyond my control? "I'm satisfied that the truth finally came out," I said. "I'm not satisfied with how it happened, or what it cost everyone involved." Dad looked older than I'd ever seen, his face lined with stress and exhaustion. "Your grandmother would be ashamed of what this family has become." The words stung because they were probably true. Grandma had valued honesty and integrity, but she'd also believed in forgiveness and family loyalty. The vindictive person I'd become would have disappointed her. "You're right," I admitted. "But she'd also be ashamed that you helped cover up a hit and run and steal her granddaughter's inheritance. She'd be ashamed that we let money and pride tear us apart." Dad was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was softer. "I was trying to protect our family. By protecting the person who was destroying it, by keeping our mistakes private, handling them internally. I thought it was better than letting the whole world judge us." I understood his reasoning, even if I disagreed with it. Dad had built his life on the belief that image mattered more than truth, that family loyalty meant protecting each other from consequences. It was a seductive philosophy that had allowed him to justify years of morally questionable choices. "Sometimes the world needs to judge us," I said. "Sometimes external accountability is the only thing that forces people to change." Dad nodded slowly, and for the first time in months, I saw something like understanding in his eyes. 3 months after Raven began serving her sentence, I received an unexpected visitor. I was working in my garden, a new hobby I'd taken up as a form of therapy, when Thomas Hendricks knocked on my front door. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by," he said. "I was in the neighborhood." "Not at all. Can I offer you coffee? Water?" "Coffee sounds good." We sat on my back porch, watching the vegetables I'd planted struggle to establish themselves in the unforgiving clay soil. Gardening had taught me patience in a way that nothing else could. The understanding that growth takes time, that some damage can be healed but never completely erased. "How are you doing?" I asked. "Better. The settlement money has helped. We were able to buy back our old house, get caught up on the kids' school expenses, and the physical therapy is working. I'll never run marathons again, but I can walk without assistance most days." "I'm glad to hear that." Thomas sipped his coffee and surveyed my modest garden. "You know, I didn't come here just to check on you. What's on your mind?" "I've been thinking about forgiveness. Not for your cousin, that's between her and her conscience. But for you, I felt my throat tighten. I don't deserve forgiveness. Maybe not. But forgiveness isn't always about what people deserve. Sometimes it's about what the person doing the forgiving needs to let go of. We sat in silence for a moment, watching a butterfly struggle against a spider web. I was angry at you for a long time, Thomas continued, for waiting 3 years, for mixing justice with revenge, for the way everything spiraled out of control. But staying angry was poisoning me, making me bitter in ways that were hurting my family. So you're forgiving me for your own sake. Partly, but also because I think you've learned something from this experience. The person who posted that video for revenge isn't the same person sitting here growing tomatoes and grappling with consequences. He was right. The last 6 months had changed me in fundamental ways, forcing me to confront the difference between justice and vengeance, between accountability and destruction. I'd learned that good intentions don't excuse harmful actions, and that truth-telling can be both necessary and destructive. I've learned that I'm capable of being cruel when I feel wronged, I admitted. That scared me more than anything else. Good. People who aren't scared of their own capacity for cruelty are the ones who end up causing the most damage. Thomas finished his coffee and stood to leave. At the gate, he turned back. There's something else. My wife and I have been talking, and we'd like to invite you to dinner sometime. Not for closure or forgiveness or any of that therapeutic stuff, just because we think you might be someone worth knowing, once you get past all the family drama and revenge plotting. The invitation surprised me. After everything I'd put his family through, the idea that they might want to know me as a person, rather than as a problem, seemed almost impossible. I'd like that, I said. But are you sure? Thomas smiled. The first genuine smile I'd seen from him. My wife makes the best lasagna in the city. It would be a shame to let family feuds and assault charges deprive you of that experience. After he left, I sat in my garden thinking about the strange path that had brought us to this moment. 6 months ago, I'd seen Thomas only as a symbol, proof of Raven's guilt, justification for my anger. Now he was becoming something more complicated, a person who'd been hurt by my family's actions, but who was choosing to move beyond that hurt rather than be defined by it. That evening, I called Mom for the first time since Raven's sentencing. Quinn? She sounded surprised to hear from me. How are you, honey? I'm okay. How's Raven adjusting to prison? It's been hard, really hard, but she says she's using the time to think about things, to understand how she got so far off track. Mom paused. She asked me to give you a message. What kind of message? She wants you to know that she understands why you did what you did, and she wants to talk to you when she gets out, to try to work things out between you. The idea of reconciling with Raven felt both impossible and inevitable. We'd always be family, bound together by shared history and mutual damage. The question was whether we could find a way to be family that didn't involve theft, lies, and revenge. What do you think I should do? I asked. I think you should follow your conscience, Mom said. It's gotten you in trouble, but it's also gotten you to the truth. Maybe that's what we needed all along. 2 weeks later, I received a call from the public defender's office. Raven wanted to see me. The women's correctional facility was a sprawling complex of concrete and razor wire an hour outside the city. After clearing security and waiting in a series of institutional rooms, I was led to a visiting area filled with folding tables and plastic chairs. Raven looked different in her prison uniform. Younger somehow, but also more serious. The entitled smugness that had characterized her for years was gone, replaced by something that might have been humility. Thank you for coming, she said when I sat down across from her. Mom said you wanted to talk. I wanted to apologize. Really apologize. Not the generic statement my lawyer wrote for the sentencing hearing. Raven folded her hands on the table. I stole your inheritance. I covered up the accident. I let an innocent family suffer while I went on with my life like nothing had happened. Why? Because I could. Because Dad always fixed my mistakes. Because I thought I was more important than other people. Because I never learned that actions have consequences. She looked directly at me. And because I was jealous of you. Jealous? Of what? Of the way Grandma looked at you. The stories she told about your art. The pride in her voice when she talked about your future. I got the jewelry, but you got her love. This revelation hit me unexpectedly. For 3 years, I'd assumed Raven had stolen the jewelry out of pure greed. I'd never considered that she might have been trying to claim something that couldn't actually be stolen. Our grandmother's affection. She loved both of us, I said. Maybe, but she respected you. She saw your potential and believed in your character. Raven's voice was quiet. I knew I could never earn that respect, so I decided to take what I could instead. We sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment, processing this admission. I'm sorry too, I said finally, for waiting 3 years to come forward, for letting my anger turn into something destructive, for not thinking about the consequences beyond my own need for vindication. You did the right thing eventually. It just would have been better for everyone if you'd done it sooner. Yes, it would have. Raven leaned forward slightly. Can I ask you something? When you posted that video, did you know about Thomas's brother? About his history of violence? I considered lying, then decided we'd had enough dishonesty. I found out that morning from Thomas. Someone called and told me Dexter was looking for you. And you didn't think to warn me? The question I'd been dreading. I thought about it. But I was still so angry, so focused on watching you face consequences, that I convinced myself it wasn't my responsibility. But you knew I might get hurt. I knew it was possible. And I did nothing to prevent it. Raven nodded slowly. So we're both responsible for people getting hurt unnecessarily. Yes, we are. It wasn't absolution for either of us, but it was acknowledgement. A shared understanding of how our choices had created a cascade of damage that extended far beyond our family drama. What happens when you get out? I asked. I don't know yet. The community service will take a year to complete. Colt won't take me back, obviously. Dad's reputation has taken a hit, so the family business connections aren't as solid as they used to be. Raven managed a rueful smile. I'll probably have to learn what it's like to live without special privileges. That might not be a bad thing. No, probably not. Before I left, Raven asked one more question. Do you think Thomas Hendricks will ever forgive me? I thought about my conversation with Thomas in the garden, about his decision to invite me to dinner despite everything I'd done. I think forgiveness is possible, I said, but it's something you'll have to earn through actions, not words. How do I do that? By becoming someone worth forgiving, by making sure that when you get out of here, you use your second chance to do better. Raven was released after serving 17 months of her 2-year sentence. True to her word, she spent the next year completing her community service at a victims' rights organization, helping families navigate the legal system after traumatic injuries. It was humbling work that put her in contact with people whose lives had been shattered by drunk drivers, domestic violence, and other crimes. I followed her progress through Mom, who reported that Raven seemed genuinely changed by her experiences in prison and community service. She'd moved into a modest apartment, found work as a paralegal, and was attending therapy to address the entitlement and recklessness that had driven her destructive choices. During this time, I'd been building my own version of accountability and redemption. Thomas and his family had indeed become friends, real friends who knew me as more than just the person who destroyed their lives and exposed their attacker. I'd also started volunteering with a restorative justice program, helping facilitate conversations between victims and offenders who wanted to work toward healing rather than just punishment. The work was difficult and often heartbreaking, but it taught me things about forgiveness, responsibility, and the complex nature of justice that I couldn't have learned any other way. Most importantly, it showed me that accountability doesn't end with punishment. It begins there and continues with the ongoing choice to do better. On the second anniversary of posting the video that had started everything, I visited Grandma's grave again. This time, I brought 2 bouquets of white roses, one from me and one that Raven had asked me to place there. She wanted you to know she's sorry, I told the headstone, and she wanted to thank you for the jewelry, even though she didn't deserve it at the time. The oak tree had grown fuller over the past 2 years, its canopy providing deeper shade over the grave. I sat beneath it and tried to imagine what Grandma would think of everything that had happened. I thought she'd be sad about the pain we'd all caused each other, but also hopeful about the growth that had come from facing that pain honestly. She'd always believed that people could change, that mistakes didn't have to define you if you were willing to learn from them. A few weeks later, Raven called me. I finished my community service, she said. Congratulations. How does it feel? Exhausting, but also like I've earned the right to move forward without carrying so much guilt. We talked for a while about her work with the victims' rights organization, about the stories she'd heard and the people she'd helped. It was clear that the experience had changed her in fundamental ways, forcing her to confront the human cost of carelessness and entitlement. I have something for you, she said eventually. What's that? I've been saving money from my job, and I wanted to give you half the value of Grandma's jewelry. I know it's not the same as having the actual pieces, but it's what I can offer right now. The gesture surprised me. Raven, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Not because I'm legally obligated, but because it's right. Grandma wanted us to share that inheritance, and I stole your portion. I can't undo that, but I can try to make it right now. I accepted her offer, not because I needed the money, but because I understood it was important for her healing process. She needed to make restitution, to demonstrate through actions that she'd internalized the lessons of the past 2 years. We met at a coffee shop downtown to make the transaction. Raven looked healthier than she had in years. No designer clothes or expensive jewelry, but also no haunted expression or defensive posture. She seemed comfortable in her own skin in a way I'd never seen before. I've been thinking about what you said in prison, she told me as she handed over the check. About earning forgiveness through actions. What about it? I think I understand now that forgiveness isn't something you can demand or expect. It's something you receive as a gift, if you're lucky, after you've done the work to become someone worth forgiving. Have you become that person? Raven considered the question seriously. I'm working on it, every day. Some days I succeed, some days I don't, but I'm finally trying. As we parted ways, I realized that this was probably the most honest conversation Raven and I had ever had. We weren't friends exactly. Too much had happened for easy reconciliation. But we weren't enemies either. We were family members who'd hurt each other badly and were learning to do better. That evening, I called Thomas to tell him about my meeting with Raven. She's really changed, I said. I think her time in prison and the community service genuinely affected her. Good for her. Change is hard work, especially when you have to admit you were wrong about fundamental things. Speaking from experience? Thomas laughed. Absolutely. Learning to forgive people who've hurt you is its own kind of character development. It forces you to examine your own capacity for cruelty and revenge. Any regrets about inviting me into your life? None. You've become a good friend, Quinn. Flawed and complicated, but good. Besides, my wife's right about the lasagna. It really would have been a shame to let family drama deprive you of that experience. 6 months later, I was working in my garden when a car pulled into my driveway. I looked up to see Raven getting out, holding a small potted plant. I hope you don't mind me stopping by, she said, echoing Thomas's words from 2 years earlier. Not at all. What's the occasion? She held up the plant, a small rose bush with white bloom. I thought you might want to plant this. For Grandma. We worked together in comfortable silence, preparing a spot near my vegetable garden for the rose bush. As we dug and planted, I thought about how different this moment was from every other interaction we'd had in our adult lives. No manipulation, no hidden agendas, no family drama. Just 2 people trying to honor someone they'd both loved, in their own flawed ways. Do you think she would have forgiven us? Raven asked as we watered the newly planted rose. For the inheritance theft and hit and run? Or for the revenge and family destruction? All of it. I considered the question, thinking about the woman who'd raised me to believe in second chances and the power of redemption. I think she would have been disappointed in our choices, I said finally, but I also think she would have been proud of the work we've done to make things right. Grandma always said that character isn't about being perfect. It's about what you do after you mess up. Raven smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in years. She did always say that. As the sun set, we sat on my back porch drinking iced tea and talking about ordinary things. Work, friends, plans for the future. It felt almost normal, like the kind of relationship we might have had if we'd learned these lessons about honesty and accountability years earlier. I should probably go, Raven said eventually. Drive carefully. I will. I always do now. As I watched her drive away, I reflected on how much had changed since that night 3 years ago, when I'd followed her home from the bar, recording her hit Thomas Hendricks and Flee the Scene. We'd all paid a price for the choices made that night. Thomas in physical pain and financial hardship, Raven in prison time and public humiliation, Dexter in a long prison sentence, and me in the recognition of my own capacity for destructive revenge. But we'd also grown from those experiences, learning lessons about justice, forgiveness, and accountability that we might never have grasped otherwise. The inheritance that had started it all, Grandma's jewelry collection, had been lost, but we'd gained something more valuable, an understanding of what it means to take responsibility for our actions and work toward redemption. The white rosebush grew well in its new home, blooming every spring as a reminder of the woman who'd taught us that love sometimes requires difficult truths, and that family means choosing to forgive and grow together, rather than tear each other down. 3 years after posting the video that changed everything, I can honestly say that while I regret the pain it caused, I don't regret the truth it revealed. Sometimes justice is messy and imperfect. Sometimes it creates new problems while solving old ones. But it's still better than the alternative of living with lies and stolen consequences. Grandma's inheritance taught us that the most valuable things we pass down aren't material objects, but the choices we make about how to treat each other, how to face our mistakes, and how to rebuild after we've broken something precious. In the end, that lesson was worth more than all the jewelry in the world. My brother said I'd never amount to anything without the family business, so I bought his biggest competitor. Ben had always been Dad's golden boy, the heir apparent to Miller Construction, the company our grandfather built from nothing. While I was getting my MBA, Ben was learning to operate excavators and sweet-talking clients at company barbecues. When Dad had his heart attack last year, Ben slid into the CEO chair like he'd been born for it. At the funeral reception, while I was still processing Dad's death, Ben cornered me in the kitchen. "Listen, Amy," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. "I know you think you deserve a piece of this, but facts are facts. You've got your fancy business degree and your pretty office job downtown, but you don't know construction. You'd never amount to anything without the family business propping you up." He was wrong about one thing. I knew construction better than he realized. For 3 years, I'd been quietly consulting for Wilson Industries, Miller Construction's biggest rival. What started as side work helping them streamline operations had evolved into something bigger. I'd learned their processes, their profit margins, their client complaints about companies like ours. More importantly, I'd learned they were struggling financially. 6 months after Dad's funeral, I liquidated every investment I had and took out the biggest loan the bank would approve. Wilson Industries was hemorrhaging cash from a lawsuit, and their board was desperate. I bought them for 60 cents on the dollar. The first person I called was our biggest client, Park Development. I'd noticed their frustration with Ben's sloppy project management during Dad's final months. "Amy Miller," I said, when the CEO answered. "I believe we can solve your timeline problems." Within 2 weeks, Wilson had secured 3 major contracts that Miller Construction had been counting on. Ben called me screaming. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" "Business," I replied calmly. "Something you said I'd never understand." The war between our companies lasted 8 months. For every bid Miller submitted, Wilson submitted a better one. We hired away their best project managers. We finished jobs early and under budget while Ben's crews fell behind schedule. The final blow came when Park Development offered us their exclusive 5-year contract, worth $12 million. It was the contract Ben had been banking on to keep Miller Construction afloat. That night, Ben showed up at my apartment, looking haggard. "You're destroying everything Dad built," he said. "No," I corrected. "I'm finishing what he started." He always said business was about evolution. The strongest survive. Last week, Miller Construction filed for bankruptcy. Today, I'm sitting in what used to be Ben's office, reading through acquisition papers that will officially merge his company into mine. But there's something Ben doesn't know yet. Something I discovered in Dad's old files that changes everything about why he really left me out of the will. The manila folder was tucked behind Dad's old filing cabinet, wedged so far back that the cleaning crew had missed it for over a year. I'd only found it when I was personally going through his office before the demolition crew arrived to gut the building. The folder was labeled Legal Personal in Dad's familiar scrawl. Inside were documents that made my blood run cold. DNA test results, dated 3 weeks before Dad died. According to the lab report, there was a 99.7% probability that Ben was not Dad's biological son. I stared at the papers for a full minute, my hands shaking. Below the DNA results was a letter from a private investigator named Donovan Cross, detailing a 6-month investigation into Mom's affair with Dad's former business partner, Ricardo Valencia. The affair had lasted 2 years. It started when Ben was conceived, but that wasn't the most damning part. Attached to the investigator's report was a copy of a contract between Ricardo and a competitor called Hartwell Industries. The contract was dated 4 years ago, right around the time Miller Construction started losing major bids to Hartwell. Ricardo had been feeding Hartwell inside information, our bid amounts, our project timelines, even our client complaints. For 4 years, Ben's biological father had been sabotaging the company that raised his son, and Ben had no idea. The final document in the folder was a handwritten letter from Dad to his attorney, never sent. Harold, I can't leave the company to a son who isn't mine, especially when his real father has been destroying everything I built. But I can't tell Ben the truth either. It would kill him to know that both his parentage and his entire career have been a lie. Leave everything to Amy. She's the only one I can trust to protect what our family actually built. If Ben contests the will, give him this folder. Let him understand why. Robert, I sat in that empty office for 3 hours, reading and rereading the documents. Everything made sense now. Dad's distance from Ben in those final months, his insistence on bringing me into more client meetings, the way he'd looked at Ben during that last Christmas dinner, like he was seeing a stranger. But Dad had died before he could send the letter to his attorney. The will he'd written 2 years earlier had stood, leaving everything to Ben. The attorney never knew about the folder or Dad's change of heart. My phone buzzed. A text from Ben. Can we meet? I need to talk to you about something important. I looked at the DNA results again. Ben had lost everything based on a lie he didn't even know he was living. For a moment, I felt sorry for him. Then I remembered his smug face at Dad's funeral, telling me I'd never amount to anything. I texted back, my office. 1 hour. When Ben arrived, he looked worse than I'd ever seen him. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled. The golden boy was tarnishing fast. I don't understand how this happened, he said, slumping into the chair across from my desk. I did everything right. I followed Dad's blueprint exactly. Maybe that was the problem, I said carefully. He looked up at me with bloodshot eyes. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. My stomach tightened. What? Did Dad ever say anything to you about me? About whether he thought I was capable? I studied his face. What makes you ask that? Ben pulled out his phone and showed me a video. I found this on Dad's old computer when I was cleaning out his home office. It's dated 2 weeks before he died. I pressed play. Dad's face appeared on the screen, tired but determined. He was sitting in his home study, the one with the built-in bookshelves that Mom had always been so proud of. Amy, Dad's voice said through the phone speaker, if you're watching this, it means I didn't get the chance to fix things before I died. There's something you need to know about Ben, about our family, about why I couldn't leave him the company. My blood turned to ice. I know you're probably angry that I left everything to your brother instead of you, but I need you to understand. I was trying to protect you from a truth that would destroy everything we thought we knew about our family. Ben was watching my face intently. He mentions you by name, Amy. This message was meant for you, not me, but I found it first. On the video, Dad continued, check behind the filing cabinet in my office. There's a folder that explains everything. You'll understand why I couldn't tell you while I was alive, and why I need you to decide what to do with the truth. The video ended. Ben set his phone down. I searched everywhere for that folder. Dad's office, his study at home, even his car. Nothing. Do you know what he was talking about? I could feel the manila folder burning in my desk drawer like it was radioactive. Ben had come here broken and defeated, asking for help understanding why his world had collapsed. The truth would devastate him completely, but it would also explain why he deserved everything that had happened to him. Ben, I said slowly, what would you do if you found out that everything you believed about your life was a lie? His laugh was bitter. After losing the company, I think I'd say that ship has already sailed. I mean everything. Your relationship with Dad, your place in the family, your right to inherit the business. Something shifted in his expression. Amy, do you know something I don't? I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the folder. I found this 3 days ago, I said, sliding it across the desk. Dad hid it behind his filing cabinet, then opened the folder. I watched his face go through a series of changes as he read. Confusion, then shock, then a pain so deep it was almost physical to witness. When he finished reading, he set the papers down very carefully, like they might explode. Ricardo Valencia, he said quietly. He was at Dad's funeral. He was. He came through the receiving line, told me how sorry he was for my loss, how Dad was like a brother to him. Ben's voice was hollow. He called me son. The irony hit us both at the same time. Ben picked up the DNA results again. So Dad knew. For months he knew that I wasn't his biological son, and that my real father was sabotaging the company. Ben, and you, he continued, his voice getting stronger. You destroyed Miller Construction not knowing any of this. You beat me fair and square. I hadn't expected that reaction. I'm sorry. If I had known... No. Ben stood up abruptly. Don't apologize. You did exactly what Dad would have wanted you to do. You protected the family legacy by taking it away from someone who had no right to it. He walked to the window that overlooked the construction yard below. Crews were already repainting the Miller Construction signs to read Wilson Miller Industries. There's something else, he said without turning around. The night before Dad died, he called me into his study. He looked at me for a long time and then he said, I hope someday you'll understand that I loved you enough to lie to you your whole life. I thought he was just emotional because of his heart condition. Ben turned back to face me. He was trying to tell me, wasn't he? I nodded. All those times growing up when people said I looked more like Mom's side of the family. All those jokes about me being the milkman's kid. And Dad's face whenever someone made those comments. Ben sank back into his chair. God, how did I not see it? Because you weren't supposed to see it, I said. Dad went to great lengths to protect you from the truth, even though it meant leaving the company to someone else. He left the company to someone who earned it. His letter says he couldn't trust the business to someone whose biological father was actively trying to destroy it. Ben was quiet for several minutes, processing everything. Finally, he looked up at me. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Okay, if you had known all of this from the beginning, about Ricardo, about the DNA results, about Dad's real wishes, would you have done things differently? I thought about it carefully. I would have told you the truth from the start, but I still would have fought for the company. Not because of revenge, but because Dad was right. I was the one who understood the business well enough to save it. Ben nodded slowly. That's what I thought you'd say. He gathered up the papers from the folder. Can I keep these? Of course. They're about your life. Our lives, he corrected. This affects you too. If Ricardo destroyed Dad's business out of some twisted revenge for being cut out of Ben's life, then he hurt your inheritance as much as mine. I hadn't thought about it that way. What are you going to do? I don't know yet, but I think the first thing I need to do is have a conversation with Ricardo Valencia. Ben stood to leave, then paused at the door. Amy, I owe you an apology. Not just for what I said at the funeral, but for 28 years of treating you like you didn't belong in this family. You were the real daughter all along, and I was just too arrogant to see it. After he left, I sat alone in the office that had once been his, trying to process what had just happened. In the span of an hour, everything had changed again. Ben wasn't the golden boy heir anymore, but he also wasn't the enemy I'd been fighting for months. And somewhere out there was Ricardo Valencia, a man who had spent 4 years systematically destroying the company that had raised his biological son. My phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Amy Miller, I answered. Ms. Miller, this is Detective Patricia Hayes with the White Collar Crime Division. I understand you recently acquired Miller Construction through a bankruptcy proceeding? My blood chilled. Yes, that's correct. We're investigating a pattern of bid rigging and industrial espionage that may involve your former family business. Would you be available to come in for an interview this afternoon? I looked at the DNA results still scattered across my desk. Detective Hayes, I think I might have some information that would be very relevant to your investigation. What kind of information? The kind that explains how Miller Construction's competitors always seem to know exactly what bids to submit. There was a pause. Ms. Miller, are you saying you have evidence of corporate espionage? I picked up the investigator's report about Ricardo's contract with Hartwell Industries. I'm saying I have evidence of a 4-year conspiracy to destroy my family's business, and I think the person responsible just made a very big mistake. What kind of mistake? He showed up to my father's funeral and called the victim his son. I could practically hear Detective Hayes sitting up straighter. Can you be here in an hour? I'll be there in 30 minutes. The police station was a stark contrast to the wood-paneled elegance of Miller Construction's old offices. Detective Hayes was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who looked like she'd seen every possible variation of corporate greed. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, she said after I'd walked her through the documents. Your father discovered that his son wasn't biologically his, and that the boy's real father had been feeding information to competitors for 4 years? That's right, and my father died before he could act on this information. But you didn't know any of this when you acquired Wilson Industries and drove Miller Construction out of business. I had no idea. I thought I was just competing against my brother for control of the family legacy. Detective Hayes studied the investigator's report. This Ricardo Valencia, he was your father's business partner 15 years ago? According to this, yes. He left the company right around the time my brother was born, and now he's affiliated with Hartwell Industries, which has been Miller Construction's biggest competitor. I nodded. The timing can't be a coincidence. Detective Hayes picked up her phone. I'm going to need to bring in the FBI. If Valencia has been coordinating bid rigging across multiple companies for 4 years, this goes way beyond local jurisdiction. 3 hours later, I was sitting in a conference room with Detective Hayes, FBI agent Colton Ross, and a federal prosecutor named Diana Thorne. They'd spread the contents of Dad's folder across a large table like pieces of a puzzle. Ms. Miller, Agent Ross said, we've been investigating Hartwell Industries for bid rigging for 6 months. We knew they had inside information, but we couldn't figure out how they were getting it. Your father's investigation fills in all the missing pieces. Prosecutor Thorne leaned forward. The question now is whether you're willing to help us build a case against Valencia and Hartwell. What would that involve? We'd need you to approach Valencia as Amy Miller, concerned sister trying to understand what happened to the family business. If you could get him to admit to the industrial espionage, we'd have enough to file charges. I thought about Ben, probably driving around trying to figure out how to process the revelation that his entire life had been built on a lie. What about my brother? He's Valencia's biological son. That actually makes this more complicated, Agent Ross admitted. Valencia might claim that any information he shared was legitimately obtained through his son's access to company files. Except Ben had no idea what was happening. He was being used. We need to prove that. And the only way to do that definitively is to get Valencia to admit that he was manipulating his son without his knowledge. Detective Hayes pulled out a small device about the size of a smartphone. We'd wire you for the conversation. Valencia thinks he won. His son's company is bankrupt, and he probably assumes all evidence of his sabotage went down with it. He might be overconfident enough to brag about what he accomplished. I stared at the recording device. This could destroy Ben completely. Finding out that his biological father manipulated him his entire life, used him to destroy the only family he'd ever known. Mr. Ben Miller is a victim in this case, Prosecutor Thorne said firmly. Valencia committed fraud, industrial espionage, and conspiracy. Your brother was unknowingly used as a weapon against his own family. When would you need me to do this? Agent Ross checked his watch. Valencia is attending a construction industry mixer tonight at the Riverside Hotel. According to our surveillance, he goes to these events regularly to network and gather intelligence. If you approached him there, it would seem natural. I thought about Dad's last letter, about his wish to protect Ben from the truth that would destroy him, but Ben already knew the truth now. The question was whether we could get justice for what Valencia had done to our family. I'll do it, I said. The Riverside Hotel's ballroom was packed with everyone who mattered in the construction industry. I spotted Ricardo Valencia immediately. He stood out not just because of his expensive suit, but because he carried himself like a man who had won a very long game. He was holding court near the bar, surrounded by Hartwell Industries executives, laughing about something. I watched him for several minutes, noting how he gestured when he talked, how he made eye contact. This was the man who had slept with my mother, fathered my brother, and then spent 4 years systematically destroying everything my family had built. I approached from his left side, timing it so he'd see me just as he finished his drink. Ricardo Valencia, I said, extending my hand. Amy Miller. I believe you knew my father. His face went through a series of micro-expressions, surprise, calculation, and something that might have been amusement. Amy Miller, he repeated, shaking my hand. Robert's daughter. I'm so sorry for your loss. Your father was a good man. Thank you. I was hoping I could speak with you privately. I'm trying to understand some things about the family business. Ricardo glanced at his companions. Gentlemen, would you excuse me for a moment? He guided me to a quieter corner of the ballroom. What can I help you with? I let my voice carry just enough vulnerability to sound convincing. I'm sure you heard about what happened between Ben and me. The company, the bankruptcy. I did hear something about that. Sibling rivalry can be devastating in family businesses. That's just it, though. I can't shake the feeling that there was more going on. Miller Construction was doing well until about 4 years ago, and then suddenly we started losing every major bid to the same handful of competitors. Ricardo's eyes sharpened with interest. Construction is a competitive industry. Sometimes companies just hit rough patches. But this wasn't a rough patch. It was systematic, like someone knew exactly what we were bidding on every project. That would be industrial espionage, Ricardo said carefully. Very serious allegations. I took a deep breath, remembering Agent Ross's instructions. Ricardo, can I ask you something personal? My mother mentioned that you and Dad were close friends years ago. What happened to your friendship? For the first time, Ricardo's composure slipped slightly. Business partnerships don't always work out. Your father and I had different visions for the company. Is that why you left right after Ben was born? The question hit its mark. Ricardo went very still. I'm not sure what you're implying, Amy. I'm not implying anything. I'm just trying to understand why Miller Construction's problems started around the same time you became affiliated with Hartwell Industries. Ricardo smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You're very perceptive. Much more so than your brother. The words sent ice through my veins. What do you mean? Ben is a good kid, but he's not particularly observant. It made things easier. Made what easier? Ricardo seemed to realize he'd said too much. He started to turn away, but I caught his arm. Ricardo, please. I just want to understand what happened to my family's company. He looked at me for a long moment, then glanced around to make sure no one was listening. You want to know what happened? Your father thought he could cut me out of the business I helped him build, just because he found out about my relationship with your mother. But Robert forgot that loyalty goes both ways. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. What kind of loyalty? Ben may not have known it, but he kept me informed about every aspect of Miller Construction's operations. Family dinners, casual conversations about upcoming bids, complaints about project timelines. He was a wonderful source of information. You used your own son to spy on Miller Construction? Ricardo's smile was cold. I used my son to reclaim what was rightfully mine. Your father stole my life's work and tried to erase me from the family I helped create. I simply returned the favor. For 4 years? For as long as it took to watch Robert Miller lose everything he thought made him better than me. I felt sick. Ben had no idea what you were doing. Of course not. Ben thought his dear old dad's former partner was just taking a friendly interest in his career. He was eager to share details about the family business with someone who understood construction. You destroyed your own son's inheritance. Ricardo shrugged. Ben will be fine. He's young. He can rebuild. But Robert Miller died knowing that everything he tried to protect from me was being torn apart by his own son. Except Ben isn't his son, I said quietly. The words hung in the air between us. Ricardo's face went pale. What did you say? I said Ben isn't Dad's biological son. DNA tests confirmed it. Dad knew for months before he died that Ben was your child, not his. Ricardo staggered slightly, gripping the back of a nearby chair. That's impossible. Robert never suspected. Dad hired a private investigator. He found out about your affair with Mom, about Ben's paternity, and about your contract with Hartwell Industries. He knew everything. I watched Ricardo process this information, seeing the moment when he realized what it meant. If Robert knew Ben wasn't his son, then why did he leave him the company? He didn't want to. Dad's real plan was to leave everything to me and tell Ben the truth about his paternity. But Dad died before he could update his will. Ricardo was staring at me like I was speaking a foreign language. You're telling me that I spent 4 years destroying a company that was never going to belong to my son anyway? I'm telling you that you spent 4 years manipulating your own child to get revenge on a man who was already planning to cut your son out of his inheritance. The color drained completely from Ricardo's face. But Ben doesn't know any of this? He knows now. I showed him the DNA results and Dad's investigation this morning. Ricardo sank into the chair he'd been gripping. What did he say? He said he understood why Dad couldn't trust him with the company, since his biological father had been sabotaging it for years. For several seconds, Ricardo just sat there, the weight of his actions settling on him. Then he looked up at me with something like desperation. I never meant for Ben to get hurt. I was angry at your father, not at him, but you hurt him anyway. You used him to destroy the only family he'd ever known, and then you let him blame himself when it all fell apart. Ricardo put his head in his hands. I thought I was protecting him. I thought if Miller Construction failed, it would prove that Robert never deserved what he had. Instead, you proved that Ben never deserved what happened to him. I could see Ricardo's composure cracking completely. 4 years of calculated revenge were collapsing under the weight of unintended consequences. Amy, he said quietly, what happens now? Now you tell the truth about what you did. All of it. And if I don't? I thought about the recording device taped to my ribs, about Agent Ross listening from a van in the hotel parking lot, about the federal prosecutor who was building a case that could send Ricardo to prison for decades. Then you'll explain it to a jury instead of to your son. Ricardo was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red. I want to talk to Ben, he said. I need to explain to him that none of this was his fault. That's not up to me. But Ricardo, before you do anything else, you need to understand something. What you did wasn't just revenge. It was fraud, conspiracy, and industrial espionage. There are going to be consequences beyond losing Ben's respect. What kind of consequences? Before I could answer, Ben appeared at my shoulder. He must have been watching from across the room. The kind that involves federal charges, Ben said quietly. Ricardo looked up at his biological son, and for a moment, the family resemblance was unmistakable. They had the same eyes, the same stubborn set to their jaw. Ben, Ricardo said, standing slowly, I need to explain. You need to confess, Ben interrupted. To Amy, to the FBI, and to every contractor whose livelihood you destroyed with your bid rigging scheme. You called the FBI? I nodded. This afternoon, after I found Dad's investigation into your activities. Ricardo looked from Ben to me and back again. You two planned this. No, Ben said. We just both decided that the truth was more important than protecting someone who spent 4 years lying to everyone. Agent Ross appeared at the edge of our conversation, flanked by 2 other federal agents. They moved smoothly through the crowd, drawing very little attention. Mr. Valencia, Agent Ross said quietly, we'd like you to come with us to answer some questions. Ricardo didn't resist as they led him away, but just before they reached the exit, he turned back to look at Ben. I'm sorry, he called out. I'm sorry for all of it. Ben watched his biological father disappear through the hotel doors, then turned to me. How much of that did they record? All of it. He confessed to using you to gather intelligence, to coordinating with Hartwell Industries, and to spending 4 years systematically sabotaging Miller Construction. Good, Ben said. He should pay for what he did to Dad. We stood there in the middle of the construction industry mixer, surrounded by the people who had watched our family's business empire collapse over the past year. Some of them were staring, having noticed the federal agents. Others were pretending not to have seen anything. Ben, I said, what happens now? Between us, I mean. He thought about it for a moment. I don't know. 6 months ago, I would have said we were enemies. This morning, I would have said we were strangers. But right now, I think we might actually be siblings. We were always siblings. Yeah, but I was too stupid to realize it. I looked around the ballroom at all the faces of contractors, architects, and developers who had either benefited from or been hurt by Ricardo's scheme. There's something else we need to talk about, I said. What? Wilson Miller Industries is going to be worth a lot more than Miller Construction ever was. And legally, you're still Dad's son, regardless of biology. You raised him, he raised you, and that matters more than DNA. Ben shook his head. Amy, I can't accept. I'm not offering you a handout. I'm offering you a job. Wilson Miller Industries needs someone who understands the legacy we're trying to preserve, someone who knows which clients Dad cared about and which ones were just paychecks. You want me to work for you? I want us to work together, build something that honors what Dad actually wanted, not what his will accidentally created. Ben extended his hand. Partners? I shook it. Partners. 6 months later, Wilson Miller Industries had become the largest construction company in the state. We'd hired back most of the skilled workers who had lost their jobs when Miller Construction went bankrupt. We'd honored all of the outstanding contracts that Ben hadn't been able to complete, and we'd completely restructured our bidding process to prevent the kind of information leaks that had destroyed the original company. Ricardo Valencia pled guilty to industrial espionage, conspiracy, and fraud. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution to every company that had been harmed by his bid rigging scheme. Hartwell Industries lost their construction license and was dissolved entirely. The most satisfying part wasn't the money or the business success. It was the look on Ben's face when we broke ground on our first major project together. A low-income housing development that Dad had always wanted to build, but never had the capital to finance. Ben had designed the project management timeline. I had secured the funding and permits. And we'd both insisted on hiring local workers wherever possible, exactly the way Dad would have done it. At the groundbreaking ceremony, Ben pulled me aside. I found something else in Dad's papers, he said, handing me a small envelope. It was tucked inside his copy of the company's original incorporation documents. I opened the envelope. Inside was a photo of Dad holding a baby, me, with a note written on the back in his handwriting. Amy at 6 months old, already trying to fix everything around her. This one's going to save the world someday. Below that, in different ink, was a line that had obviously been added later. She saved me instead. I looked up at Ben, whose eyes were suspiciously bright. He knew, I said. Even when you were the golden boy, even when he was grooming you to take over, he knew I was the one who would really protect the company. Yeah, Ben said. But he also knew that you'd need me to help you do it right. I thought about that as we watched the excavators break ground on the housing development. Dad had been playing a longer game than any of us had realized. He'd left the company to Ben knowing that I'd fight for it, knowing that the truth about Ricardo would eventually come to light, and knowing that Ben and I would be stronger together than either of us could be alone. He was still manipulating us from beyond the grave, I said. Ben laughed. Yeah, but this time it worked out. A year later, Ben and I were standing in the completed community center of our housing development, watching kids play in a playground that we'd built to Dad's exact specifications from plans we'd found in his desk drawer. Plans he'd drawn 20 years ago, but never had the chance to implement. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Dad had lived long enough to tell you the truth himself? I asked. Ben considered the question. I think about it sometimes, but honestly, I'm glad it happened the way it did. Really? If Dad had just handed me a DNA test and told me Ricardo was my biological father, I probably would have been too hurt and angry to think clearly. I might have made different choices. Like what? Like choosing Ricardo's version of the truth over yours. Like believing that Dad had betrayed me instead of understanding that Ricardo had betrayed all of us. I watched a little girl climb to the top of the jungle gym and wave at her mother. The playground was full of families that were living in affordable housing because Ben and I had learned to trust each other. Ben, I said, can I ask you something? Sure. Do you ever wish Ricardo had been a better father? That he'd chosen to be part of your life honestly instead of using you for revenge? Ben was quiet for a long time watching the kids play. I used to think about that, he said finally. But I realized that wishing for a different father is like wishing for a different life entirely. And I like the life I ended up with, even though it involved losing the family business and finding out your entire childhood was built on lies. Especially because of that. Because it led me here, working with my actual sister to build something that matters. 6 months after that conversation, Ben called me into his office with an expression I couldn't read. Amy, he said, I need to tell you something. My stomach dropped. After everything we'd been through, I'd learned to associate that tone of voice with bad news. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, but I got a call from Ricardo's attorney this morning. I sat down heavily. Ricardo had been in federal prison for almost 2 years, and we'd heard nothing from him since his sentencing. What did he want? Ricardo is dying, pancreatic cancer. He has maybe 3 months left. I wasn't sure how to respond to that information. I'm sorry, Ben. He wants to see me, to apologize in person, and to explain some things that he couldn't say during his trial. Are you going to go? Ben leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. I don't know. Part of me thinks he's earned the right to say goodbye to his son, but another part of me thinks that ship sailed when he decided to use me as a weapon against the only father I ever really had. What does your gut tell you? My gut tells me that I'll regret it if I don't go, and I'll probably regret it if I do. I thought about Dad's letter, about his belief that everyone deserved a chance at redemption, even when they didn't deserve forgiveness. Do you want me to come with you? Ben looked surprised. You'd do that? Ricardo destroyed our family business and manipulated both of us for years, but he's also dying, and he's your biological father. You shouldn't have to face that alone. Amy, you don't owe him anything. I'm not doing it for him. I'm doing it for you. The federal prison was a stark, gray complex, surrounded by high fences and guard towers. Ben and I went through multiple security checkpoints before being led to a small visitor's room with plastic chairs and fluorescent lighting. When Ricardo was brought in, I barely recognized him. The confident man who had held court at construction industry mixers was gone, replaced by someone who looked decades older and pounds lighter. The orange prison jumpsuit hung loose on his frame. He sat down across from us, his movements careful and painful. Ben, he said, his voice hoarse, thank you for coming. Amy came too, Ben said simply. Ricardo looked at me with something that might have been gratitude. Amy, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. You're right, I said. You don't. But I need you both to understand something about what I did and why I did it. Ben leaned forward slightly. We're listening. Ricardo took a shaky breath. When your mother and I had our affair, it wasn't just physical. I thought I loved her, and I thought she loved me. When she chose to stay with Robert, it destroyed something in me. That doesn't justify what you did, I said. No, it doesn't. But what made it worse was that Robert knew about the affair, and he chose to raise Ben anyway. He could have exposed me, could have demanded custody, could have destroyed my reputation in the industry. Instead, he just quietly asked me to leave the company and never contact your family again. Ben's face was unreadable. And that made you angry? It made me feel erased. Like I was so insignificant that Robert could just wave his hand and make me disappear from my own son's life. So you decided to get revenge, I said. I decided to prove that Robert Miller wasn't the saint everyone thought he was. I wanted to show that he was just as capable of underhanded tactics as anyone else. Except he wasn't, Ben said quietly. Dad never stooped to your level. He just kept trying to build something good, even while you were tearing it down. Ricardo closed his eyes. I know that now. I've had 2 years in here to think about what I did, and I know that I was wrong about Robert. He was a better man than I'll ever be. Why are you telling us this now? I asked. Because I want Ben to know that none of what happened was his fault. I manipulated him from the time he was a teenager, asking casual questions about the family business, pretending to be proud of his accomplishments when I was actually using his information to sabotage his father. Ben was very quiet, absorbing this. And Amy, Ricardo continued, I want you to know that your father was proud of you. In those last few months, when he started to figure out what I was doing, he told several people that his daughter was the only one smart enough to save the family business. How do you know that? Because some of those people told me. They thought they were sharing gossip about family drama. They had no idea they were describing Robert's strategy for protecting his company from me. I felt tears starting to form. Dad knew I'd fight for the business. He was counting on it. He wanted someone strong enough to uncover the truth and smart enough to use it properly. Ben finally spoke. Ricardo, I need to ask you something. Anything. If you could go back and do things differently, what would you change? Ricardo thought about it for a long time. I would have fought for my rights as your father openly and honestly, instead of trying to destroy the man who raised you. I would have tried to build something with you instead of using you to tear something down. And if Dad had said no, if he'd refused to let you be part of my life, then I would have accepted his decision and tried to earn back his trust. I wouldn't have spent 4 years proving that he was right to keep me away from you. Ben nodded slowly. Thank you for telling me that. Ben, I know I have no right to ask this, but do you think you could ever forgive me? Not for me, but for yourself? Ben looked at me, then back at Ricardo. I can forgive you for hurting me, he said carefully. But I can't forgive you for hurting Dad and Amy. That's something you'll have to live with. I understand. But I also want you to know that I turned out okay. Despite everything you did, or maybe because of it, I ended up exactly where I was supposed to be. Ricardo smiled sadly. Working with your sister to build something your father would be proud of? Something all 3 of our fathers would be proud of, Ben corrected. Robert Miller, who raised me, our grandfather, who started the company, and you, who taught me, even if accidentally. That integrity matters more than winning. When we left the prison, Ben and I drove in silence for several miles. How do you feel? I asked finally. Relieved, he said. I've been carrying around this anger for 2 years and now I can let it go. Do you think he was telling the truth about Dad being proud of me? Ben pulled the car over and turned to look at me. Amy, Dad was always proud of you, even when I was too selfish to see it. Even when I thought I was the favorite. Dad used to talk about your business instincts, your ability to see the big picture, your determination to fix things that were broken. Really? Really? And if you want proof, just look at what we've built together. This is exactly what Dad would have wanted. His 2 kids working together to create something bigger than either of us could manage alone. 2 months later, Ricardo Valencia died in the prison hospital. Ben arranged for a small funeral service, which only the 2 of us attended. It was strange, sitting in an empty chapel and mourning a man who had caused so much damage to our family. But it was also necessary, because regardless of everything else, Ricardo was Ben's biological father, and some connections transcend the pain they cause. At the gravesite, Ben placed a single white rose on the casket. What are you thinking about? I asked. I'm thinking about the difference between a father and a dad, he said. Ricardo was my father because of biology, but Robert Miller was my dad because of choice. And both of those things matter. Yeah, they do, but one matters more than the other. As we walked back to the car, Ben pulled out his phone and showed me a photo. It was the picture Dad had taken of me as a baby, with his note about me saving the world. I carry this with me now, he said. It reminds me that Dad always knew exactly who we were, even when we didn't know ourselves. Ben, yeah, I think we turned out okay. He smiled. Yeah, Amy, I think we did. Wilson Miller Industries is now the largest construction company in 3 states. We specialize in affordable housing, community development, and infrastructure projects that improve people's lives. Ben handles project management and client relations. I handle finances, strategy, and business development. We've never had another conversation about inheritance or who deserves what part of the company. We both own exactly 50%, and we both work exactly as hard as we need to in order to keep building something that honors the man who raised us. Sometimes I still find myself wondering what would have happened if Dad had lived long enough to update his will, or if Ben and I had known the truth about Ricardo from the beginning. But mostly, I'm grateful that the story turned out the way it did. Because the truth is, Ben was right. Sometimes the best outcomes come from the worst circumstances. Sometimes you have to lose everything you think you want in order to find everything you actually need. And sometimes, just sometimes, the people who hurt you the most end up teaching you the most important lessons about who you want to become. Dad always said that construction was about building something that would last. What he didn't mention was that the most important thing you can build isn't made of concrete and steel. It's made of trust, forgiveness, and the decision to keep choosing your family every single day, even when they disappoint you. Especially when they disappoint you. Ben and I learned that lesson the hard way. But we learned it together, and that made all the difference.